Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're going to dive deep into the cascading systemic failures and the really profound human drama surrounding the Titanic's lifeboats. Most of us are incredibly familiar with the story of the iceberg, but the true anatomy of this disaster? It actually lies in the wooden boats and canvas rafts hanging from the ship's davits.
Okay, let's kick things off with a number that is honestly just terrifying. 53%. Think about that for a second. Even if every single lifeboat on the Titanic had been perfectly filled to its maximum capacity, they could only hold 53% of the people actually on board that freezing night. Mathematically speaking, before the ship even struck the iceberg, nearly half the souls on board were already doomed if they ever needed a full evacuation.
The illusion of safety. We have to start our analysis with this massive paradox: the ship's perceived invulnerability versus its terrifyingly inadequate hardware. It's basically a mathematical certainty of a tragedy. You have this massive, maximum capacity of over 3,300 people, right? Then a dangerously small lifeboat capacity of just 1,178. And finally, the tragic reality, only 706 actual survivors. The math simply never added up to survival. So what did they actually have on board to face the North Atlantic? Well, the Titanic carried just 20 lifeboats in total. That's the whole shebang. 14 standard wooden lifeboats, 2 smaller emergency cutters kept swung out for man-overboard situations, and 4 collapsible boats. As we'll see, their placement and the crew's total ignorance of their actual strength proved absolutely disastrous.
And speaking of those collapsibles, take the Engelhart model, for example. These weren't standard wooden boats. Actually, scratch that. They weren't really boats at all. They were essentially flat, unsinkable rafts made of capote and cork, with heavy canvas sides that had to be physically pulled up and locked into place. These awkward canvas rafts were vital to the final survivors, yet 2 of them were stored so poorly, way up on the roof of the officers' quarters, that they literally had to be shoved off the roof as the deck flooded.
Moving on to Section 2. Outdated rules and fatal flaws.
To really understand this macro-level failure, we have to look at the law. And here is something that absolutely blows my mind. The Titanic? It wasn't breaking the law. In fact, she carried 4 more lifeboats than the 16 required by the British Board of Trade. How is that even possible?
Well, safety regulations were entirely frozen in time. The laws governing the Titanic in 1912 were actually written way back in 1894, and they were meant for ships that maxed out at 10,000 tons. The Titanic was an absolute leviathan at over 46,000 tons. Technology had completely outpaced regulation, creating a fatal legal loophole.
But it wasn't just a loophole, it was an entire mindset. The prevailing philosophy of the time wasn't about mass simultaneous evacuation. Shipbuilders genuinely believed that modern vessels with watertight compartments were so safe that every ship should be her own lifeboat. The actual lifeboats? They were just intended to ferry passengers in small little batches from a wounded ship to a rescue vessel over many hours. It was a deadly assumption of unsinkability.
Section 3. Chaos on the boat deck.
Let's zoom in on the micro-level human decisions and see how all of this builds into pure, unadulterated chaos on the freezing boat deck. The timeline here is relentlessly fast. They hit the iceberg at 11:40 p.m., but the first boat doesn't leave until 12:45 a.m. You have a completely disorganized crew who had literally zero proper evacuation training, suddenly forced to lower 20 heavy boats down 70 feet of sheer steel in the pitch black, and they have to do it all in just an hour and a half.
Adding to the chaos was a staggering breakdown in command. Captain Smith gives the order, women and children in and lower away. Pretty clear, right? Well, look at how his officers interpreted this. On the starboard side, First Officer Murdoch let men in if there was room. It was women and children first. But on the port side, Second Officer Lightoller sent boats down half empty rather than let a man board. Women and children only. Your chances of living or dying were entirely dictated by a simple misunderstanding and which side of the deck you happened to walk toward.
And this confusion leads us straight to the tragedy of the very first launch. Lifeboat 7 rode away into the dark with only 28 people aboard, despite having room for 65. Why? Because many passengers simply didn't believe the ship would sink and absolutely refused to step out over a 70-foot drop into a tiny wooden boat. But wait, there's another reason these boats were dropping half empty. The ship's officers genuinely feared the lifeboats would buckle and snap in half while hanging from the ropes if they were fully loaded. But they were wrong. The boats were built with steel-reinforced keels explicitly tested for the weight of 70 men. The shipbuilders knew this for sure, but they never communicated it to the crew. Just a simple, missing piece of information that cost hundreds of lives.
Section 4. Heroes, Cowards, and Controversies. As the math turned dire and the ship sank lower, the full spectrum of human behavior emerged in the freezing night air. We see incredible, selfless bravery. Take Ida Strauss and her husband Isidore, the co-owner of Macy's. They were offered seats, but Isidore refused to go before younger men, and Ida refused to leave his side, stating she would not be separated from her husband. They chose to walk arm in arm to their fate.
Then there's millionaire Benjamin Guggenheim. He realizes the end is near, so what does he do? He calmly takes off his life vest, changes into his absolute finest evening wear, and ensures no woman would be left aboard because he acted like a coward.
But man, you have to contrast that heroism with the pure, terrified self-preservation happening out on the water. In Lifeboat 6, Margaret Molly Brown is desperately pleading with Quartermaster Robert Hitchens to row back and save drowning victims. Hitchens callously refuses. He's terrified that the desperate swimmers would swamp their boat, telling the survivors that it was our lives now, not theirs.
And we absolutely have to talk about J. Bruce Ismay. He was the highest-ranking official of the White Star Line aboard. He stepped into a collapsible lifeboat in the final moments while 1,500 of his passengers and crew perished. This single act of self-preservation became one of the disaster's most bitter and enduring controversies.
You know, every single boat out there had its own intense, desperate mini-drama. Sir Cosmo Duff Gordon writing 5-pound checks to his crew in Boat 1, which immediately sparked rumors of bribery. Major Pushin literally sliding down ropes to help row Boat 6. A father dropping his 2 young boys, the Titanic orphans, into collapsible D before dying. Officer Lowe heroically transferring his passengers so he could sail back into the wreckage to pull survivors from the water. And dozens of men balancing on the overturned hull of collapsible B just to survive the freezing swells.
Finally, Section 5. The chilling aftermath.
Let's zoom back out and look at the end of this nightmare. As the sun finally rose, the rescue ship Carpathia arrived. Look at the sheer agonizing length of this timeline. From 4:10 in the morning until 8:30 a.m., they were slowly, painstakingly winching up the survivors. The ferrying process took hours in the morning light, saving exactly 706 traumatized souls.
So what actually happened to the lifeboats? The very things that saved these people. Only 13 of them were hauled aboard the Carpathia. They were assessed for salvage at just under $5,000, the only items of value officially recovered from the shipwreck. But the very hardware that made the difference between life and death was immediately stripped by souvenir hunters in New York. And by the end of 1912, these historic lifeboats were quietly scrapped or redistributed. They were effectively erased from history.
So this explainer leaves us with a really haunting question. The Titanic wasn't just sunk by ice, right? It was sunk by hubris, outdated laws, and a blind faith in modern engineering. In our world of rapid technological advancement today, what modern illusions of safety are we relying on? What are the unsinkable systems of our era that might be operating with out-of-date regulations right now? It's definitely a question worth asking. Thanks for joining me to unpack this incredible history.